Midnight. Silence shattered. A convoy vanished in smoke and fire, not in a war-torn nation, not on a distant battlefield, but on the southeastern edge of Burkina Faso. Drones, humming like mechanical predators, sliced through the darkness. Explosions tore through the night. By dawn, twisted metal lay scattered, and the world woke to a question no one could ignore. Who dared strike here? And why? Captain Ibrahim Traoré had just rewritten the rules. For decades, drone warfare was a game played by billion-dollar empires. Yet here, in a country the world once dismissed as weak and peripheral, precision strikes carried out in 12 minutes forced global powers to watch, uncomfortably. North Korean prototypes, Russian guidance, and an African command network. This was no accident. This was a message. The convoy was not innocent. Hidden explosives, foreign-trained mercenaries, secret maps of resources. Whoever thought Burkina Faso could be manipulated had underestimated its resolve, and the warning was clear. Africa is no longer a passive pawn. By the time the sun rose over Ouagadougou, one truth was undeniable. Something fundamental had shifted. Sovereignty would now be defended not with words, but with fire, technology, and an unyielding will. And the question lingered. Was this only the beginning? The streets were alive with whispers, before the first headlines even hit the presses. Market stalls buzzed, taxis slowed, and residents paused mid-step as radios crackled with fragments of news. A drone strike. One vendor murmured, eyes wide. In Burkina Faso, a schoolteacher shook her head, unable to reconcile the calm. She knew with the violence reported, even the elders, hardened by decades of political uncertainty and foreign interference, felt a shiver of unease and, strangely, a flicker of pride. Inside the presidential office, Captain Traoré reviewed satellite feeds and intelligence reports. Every detail confirmed what he already knew. The convoy carried the threat to the nation's first sovereign oil refinery. The Kudugu facility, months from full operation, represented more than wealth. It was independence, a chance to escape decades of exploitation and foreign control. Allowing it to be destroyed would have been a surrender, an admission that Burkina Faso remained at the mercy of invisible hands. The weight of history pressed against him. Traoré's mind raced through past mistakes and victories of African nations, those who had lost their resources, their voices, and too often, their dignity. But tonight, he had acted, and the act was deliberate, decisive, and unforgiving, yet even in triumph. Doubt whispered, who funded these mercenaries? Which shadowy forces had supplied the weapons, the intelligence, the maps? The answer was hidden in layers of shell companies, coded transactions, and encrypted communications tracing back to distant capitals. Traoré knew that while the convoy was neutralized, the eyes watching from afar were now awake and angry. Across the city, citizens sensed the change even before official confirmation. Flags were raised spontaneously. Conversations turned into chants. On the sidewalks, young men and women exchanged stories of the strike, debating what it meant for their future. Social media ignited with hashtags proclaiming sovereignty, courage, and resistance. For the first time in years, the people of Burkina Faso felt seen not as a backdrop for global politics, but as actors in their own story. And yet, tension lingered. The strike had solved one problem, but opened many others. Regional neighbors watched anxiously. Western capitals murmured about instability. Investors hesitated, wondering if billions of dollars in contracts could survive a new African doctrine of self-defense. Everyone understood the paradox. Burkina Faso had shown strength, but strength invites scrutiny, envy, and retaliation. Captain Traoré, standing before maps and screens, allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. In 12 minutes, the strike had changed the perception of his nation. In a single night, a message had been sent to the world. Burkina Faso would no longer be silent, no longer exploited, no longer passive. But as the smoke cleared and dawn painted the city gold, he knew this was only the beginning. Outside, the streets held a charged silence. People waited, unsure of what would come next, yet feeling the pulse of history in their veins. Somewhere, across borders, unseen adversaries calculated their response. And deep in Traore's mind, a single question remained. Had he truly ignited a spark of freedom, or opened a door to an even greater storm? The night was over. The world had woken, and Burkina Faso, its sovereignty freshly claimed, stood at the edge of a new era. But the first move had been made, and the board was far from settled. The city of Ouagadougou still smelled of smoke and burnt metal, a reminder of the midnight strike that had shocked the world. But inside the walls of the presidential residence, silence carried a different weight. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat alone, reviewing reports, feeds, and satellite imagery. He was a man of paradoxes, young, yet tempered by responsibility, confident, yet burdened by doubt. A soldier who spoke the language of strategy as fluently as diplomacy. Born in a small village near the Muhun River, Traoré's childhood was shaped by scarcity and resilience. His father had labored on farms abandoned by international investors, while his mother had sewn uniforms for local schools. From an early age, Ibrahim understood two truths. Opportunity was rare, and courage was often all a man had. Schoolbooks told stories of African leaders who failed to protect their people. Life taught him that inaction cost lives. By his teenage years, he had joined a local militia to defend his community against bandits and cross-border raiders. Those early experiences left marks both in the discipline of his mind and in the fire in his eyes. As he climbed the ranks of the national military, Traoré observed patterns repeated across Africa. Leaders too timid, nations too dependent on foreign aid, and sovereignty treated as an abstract ideal rather than a tangible shield. Yet he also saw hope small, persistent, often overlooked. Soldiers who remembered what it meant to fight not for pay, but for family. Communities that cultivated not just crops, but dignity. It was this duality, desperation, and determination that shaped his approach to leadership. The strike that had erupted just hours before was not the act of a reckless officer. It was the culmination of years of planning and philosophy. Every detail from the acquisition of the NA-7 drones to the coordination with AESnet was part of a vision: Burkina Faso as a nation that could defend its people, its resources, and its future without waiting for permission. Traoré understood the optics. The world would call it audacious, perhaps reckless. But in his eyes, audacity was a prerequisite for survival. Inside his office, advisors whispered about fallout. Would regional neighbors retaliate? Could foreign powers exert pressure to reverse the newfound autonomy? Traoré listened, but did not flinch. His eyes, dark and steady, reflected a calculation born of history. If Africa was to be treated as an equal on the global stage, it could no longer react to threats. It had to anticipate them, neutralize them, and assert its own rules. Yet beneath the exterior of the strategist lay a man who carried the weight of doubt. Traoré recalled faces of soldiers lost in border skirmishes, the families waiting for news that sometimes never came, and the legacy of leaders who had been betrayed by allies and enemies alike. Could he bear the responsibility if the strike provoked a cascade of retaliation? Could he protect not just the refinery, but the lives intertwined with it? These questions lingered, but they did not paralyze him. They sharpened his resolve. Even as he pondered the implications, messages arrived from AESnet operatives in Mali and Niger. Reports of suspicious movements, encrypted chatter, and logistic anomalies confirmed one truth. The threat was far from neutralized. The strike had struck a nerve, exposing networks that spanned borders, funding channels that wound through distant capitals, and operatives trained to exploit weakness. Traoré's hand hovered over a console, not hesitating, but ready. He knew the midnight strike was only the first move in a broader strategy, a calculated test of resolve and capability. The next steps would require not just technology and military precision, but diplomacy, secrecy, and the unwavering commitment of every soldier and analyst under his command. Outside, the city began to stir. Markets reopened, schools resumed, and children played unaware of the threads of global power converging above and below them. But in the quiet rooms of the presidential complex, the pulse of history thumped loudly. Captain Traoré was no longer merely a leader. He was the embodiment of a new doctrine, one that insisted Africa would no longer be defined by its dependencies or the expectations of outsiders, The night strike had shifted perceptions, but it had also exposed fractures and questions that demanded answers. Who funded the mercenaries? Which hidden networks remained active? How far would foreign powers go to reassert control? Traore knew he had only seen the tip of the iceberg. As he leaned back, gaze fixed on the city lights glimmering beneath the dawn, he whispered to himself, "They think the first strike is the end. They have no idea. This is just the beginning." And from somewhere deep within the encrypted networks of AES-net, a single alert blinked, red indicating movement, coordination, and a plan forming beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. The next challenge had already arrived. Traore knew the midnight strike was only the start, but what he saw on the monitors suggested the enemy had been preparing for him, longer than anyone realized. The question was not if they would strike back, but when and how devastating the retaliation might be. The sun rose over Ouagadougou, casting long shadows over streets, still bearing traces of the midnight strike. Smoke lingered in alleys, but life was stirring. Vendors swept debris from market stalls, children laughed on cracked pavements, and commuters navigated roads scarred by months of neglect. Burkina Faso had survived hardship before droughts, coups, economic collapses, but the tension in the air felt different this time. It was charged with possibility and with danger. For decades, the nation had been labeled a backwater, a peripheral state in the eyes of the world. Aid flowed sporadically, but development stalled. Foreign powers dictated terms, and the people learned early that sovereignty was a word written in someone else's ledger. Yet beneath this veneer of fragility, resilience thrived. Farmers adapted to unpredictable rains, teachers persevered in crumbling schools, and communities created networks of mutual aid that governments could neither fund nor control. This was a country built on quiet determination, and it had now been thrust into the global spotlight. In the capital, political currents ran deep and often unseen. Opposition figures whispered in shadowed cafes, debating the implications of the drone strike. Was Captain Ibrahim Traoré a visionary, or had he gambled recklessly with lives and the nation's reputation? Some feared retaliation from neighbors and foreign powers. Others celebrated a leader willing to confront threats that had been tolerated for decades. Every conversation, every debate, carried the weight of history, generations of leaders who had faltered, nation exploited, promises broken. Meanwhile, rural regions faced an even graver reality. Intelligence reports suggested pockets of insurgent activity along the southeastern border, the very corridor the convoy had used. Villagers, accustomed to smuggling, banditry, and sporadic military presence, now found themselves under the silent watch of AES-net drones. Their movements scrutinized and mapped. Rumors spread like wildfire. Foreign mercenaries, sophisticated weapons, covert financing, fear and hope intermingled in equal measure. In the presidential office, Traoré convened a quiet council of advisors. Maps were spread across tables, satellite imagery highlighted choke points, and analysts spoke in precise, clipped tones. The convoy's destruction had revealed a tangled web of interests: foreign contractors, shell companies, even neighboring operatives, with questionable loyalties. Each revelation suggested not just a threat to the refinery, but a broader plot to undermine Burkina Faso's independence. The stakes were no longer local. They were continental. Traoré's gaze fell on a photo pinned to the wall. His childhood village along the Mouhoun River. He remembered the riverside markets, the schools his mother had sewn uniforms for, the community that had survived on sheer grit. Protecting Kudugu was more than safeguarding infrastructure. It was defending the possibility that children, like those in the photo, could grow up free from manipulation, free to shape their own country. Yet, even as strategy meetings progressed, cracks within the political landscape became apparent. Some ministers feared that aggressive posturing might provoke economic sanctions or foreign interference. Others warned that a perceived overreach could destabilize the fragile coalition that had allowed Traoré to rise to power. The question was clear: how much could Burkina Faso assert without triggering a cascade of unintended consequences? Outside, ordinary citizens were forming their own judgments. Market gossip turned into informal assemblies, and small gatherings debated the morality and necessity of the strike. Farmers who once whispered about foreign influence now spoke openly of sovereignty, pride, and resistance. Students drafted essays and poems, framing the strike as both a warning and an inspiration. Across neighborhoods, murals began appearing, images of drones soaring over the Sahel, banners proclaiming, "We decide our fate." Culture had become commentary. Art had become advocacy. At the same time, intelligence units continued to track movements across borders. Communications intercepted in Mali, and Niger hinted at potential reprisals, though the exact nature remained unclear. Analysts warned of shadowy actors, mercenaries, ex-military operatives, and financiers operating through layers of obfuscation. Every signal suggested that the midnight strike had triggered a chain reaction, one that would test the limits of the nation's military, political, and social resilience. As evening fell, the city's skyline glimmered under a calm that was anything but serene. Traoré stood on the balcony of the presidential complex, eyes scanning the horizon. The air was thick with expectation. The people were watching, the neighbors were watching, and the world beyond the Sahel was certainly watching. Burkina Faso had taken its first bold step, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. And then a secure line buzzed on his desk. Analysts had detected unusual activity along a route previously thought secure, a hint that the forces behind the convoy were regrouping, adapting, planning. Traoré's jaw tightened. The midnight strike had been decisive, but it was only the opening move in a game that could stretch across borders, years, and generations. The shadowy networks were stirring, and for the first time, Captain Ibrahim Traoré understood that the threat to Burkina Faso's sovereignty might be closer, smarter, and deadlier than anyone had imagined. The real battle was only beginning. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when reports arrived from Mali and Niger. AESnet, the joint security network linking Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, had detected unusual activity near border corridors. Captain Ibrahim Traoré leaned over a digital map, fingers tracing the lines of movement. Each signal, each anomaly, suggested one thing. This was not a random threat. It was coordinated, deliberate, and designed to test the resolve of the new Sahel alliance. AESnet was more than technology. It was a statement, through the integration of satellite imagery, encrypted communications, and AI-guided drones. The network symbolized the birth of African self-reliance in defense. But the human element mattered just as much. Analysts, military advisors, and field operatives from 3 nations worked in unison, bound not by contracts or foreign directives, but by the principle of collective sovereignty. For Traoré, it was a vision realized but also a delicate balancing act. The alliance had supporters and detractors alike. Some neighboring states observed quietly, weighing the benefits of collaboration against the risk of antagonizing entrenched global powers. Western intelligence operatives watched even more closely, analyzing patterns, movement, and capacity. Washington, Paris, and London were unaccustomed to African nations coordinating defense strategies independently. The signal sent by Burkina Faso was unmistakable. Africa would not wait for permission. Traoré convened a virtual meeting with the heads of the Sahel Alliance. The room, secure and windowless, hummed with urgency. Mali's defense minister spoke first, outlining recent border incursions. Niger's chief intelligence officer detailed anomalies suggesting foreign contractors moving undercover. Traoré listened, noting the connections to shell companies, mercenaries, and encrypted communications. This was not simply a threat to infrastructure, it was a threat to the very principle of regional autonomy. Yet within the alliance, friction simmered, divergent priorities emerged. Mali's leadership favored cautious diplomacy, hoping to avoid provoking external actors. Niger emphasized immediate countermeasures, stressing intelligence-led preemption. Traoré, as the youngest and most decisive among them, had to navigate these tensions with precision. His challenge was clear: unify the alliance while projecting strength. Any sign of hesitation could be exploited, undermining months of careful coordination. Meanwhile, intelligence reports highlighted the complexity of adversaries. Mercenaries operating across the Sahel were not faceless operatives. Many were former military officers from neighboring states, trained under foreign programs. equipped with advanced Western technology, satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and on the ground, informants revealed a network of interests spanning continents. The stakes were high, the lines blurred between diplomacy, espionage, and military confrontation. Traoré's thoughts shifted to the political ramifications. A misstep could provoke sanctions, military pressure, or covert operations designed to destabilize the alliance. Yet inaction carried its own peril. The midnight strike had established a precedent, showing that Burkina Faso would act decisively. Maintaining credibility now meant anticipating threats and demonstrating capability before enemies could strike. Outside the walls of the secure complex, news of the Sahel coordination filtered slowly into public consciousness. Citizens debated, speculated, and cheered. Street murals appeared, depicting the alliance as a metallic shield spanning the three nations. Radio talk shows dissected AESnet, discussing what it meant for regional sovereignty. Even skeptical observers admitted a shift had occurred. For the first time in decades, African nations were defining security on their own terms. But the alliance was not yet tested. Early intelligence hinted at movements of mercenary groups, the assembly of convoys in remote corridors, and encrypted chatter, pointing towards strategic targets. The question on everyone's mind: could the young Sahel network withstand pressures from within and outside? Could three nations, historically fragmented and externally influenced, project unified strength across a volatile region? Traoré, staring at the lines of code and movement on his screen, allowed himself a rare moment of clarity. This was more than defense. It was a demonstration that African nations could coordinate with precision, with foresight, and with autonomy. Yet the presence of shadow networks reminded him that control was always contested. The alliance had to be vigilant, adaptive, and ruthless when necessary. Ostduskfell, AESnet operators reported unusual traffic along a route previously considered low risk. Data suggested a contingent of mercenaries, possibly reorganizing after the convoy strike, testing borders, and probing for weaknesses. The alert blinked red, a warning of what might come next. The network was in place, the alliance formed, but Traoré realized the adversary was already adapting. Every move Burkina Faso and its partners made could trigger a response more calculated and lethal than anything seen before. The question lingered: who would strike first in this unfolding chess game? And what would be the cost? Night had fallen over the southeastern corridor, a stretch of land where the borders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and near bleu on a moonlight. The desert wind whispered across the dry scrub, carrying dust and secrets alike. In a hidden operations center, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood over a digital map, eyes fixed on the blinking dots that marked the convoy. Every movement, every turn, every pause was monitored with a precision that only AESnet could provide. "This is it," he said, voice low but firm. "They think the cover of night will hide them. They're wrong." His deputy, Lieutenant Camara, leaned closer. "Sir, satellite feeds show the convoy is heavily armed. They're not just transporting explosives. They have communications gear, encrypted devices, and what looks like foreign-manufactured rifles." Traoré's jaw tightened. "Then we neutralize the threat before it reaches the refinery." "No, collateral. No hesitation. Every second counts." Minutes stretched like hours as the team coordinated positioning, confirming flight paths, and synchronizing the NA-7 drones. The machines themselves hovered unseen, infrared sensors scanning the convoy's vehicles. In the control room, analysts whispered about contingencies. What if the convoy splits? What if reinforcements appear? Traoré absorbed each scenario, weighing risk and reward, calculating probability with a soldier's mind and a leader's instinct. Outside, the convoy moved like shadows, unaware of the eyes tracking them from hundreds of kilometers above. Drivers chatted nervously. Guards scanned the terrain, and an unseen hand guided their path along the southeastern corridor. They believed they were untouchable, shielded by darkness and secrecy. They did not know that the rules of engagement had changed. Traoré remembered the intelligence briefing from earlier that day. Intercepted communications, shell company trails, and patterns of previous attacks painted a picture clear enough for action. He thought of the refinery, the spine of the nation, and the potential devastation if the convoy succeeded. For him, hesitation was betrayal. For the nation, action was survival. Drones are in position. Camara reported. Visual confirmation on all targets. Traoré exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility pressed down. He knew that one misstep could cost lives, provoke international backlash, or compromise the fragile credibility of AES-net. And yet, inaction was not an option. Africa's sovereignty was not negotiated in boardrooms thousands of miles away. It was defended here, tonight, in the shadows. Execute, he said. The room went quiet, save for the low hum of the drones activating. Across the control screens, the convoy's path became illuminated in thermal imaging. Every vehicle, a target of calculated precision. 12 minutes would determine the fate of a nation's future. Explosions broke the stillness like a gunshot in a cathedral. One by one, vehicles erupted in fire and twisted metal, flames licking the desert night. Smoke spiraled skyward, visible from dozens of kilometers away. Analysts monitored the strike with bated breath, confirming that no civilians had been caught in the blast. The operation, for all its intensity, was surgical, a statement of capability and intent. Traoré allowed himself a brief nod, but satisfaction was tempered by caution. The convoy was destroyed, yet the network behind it remained elusive. Who had organized it? Who funded it? The trail was tangled, stretching across borders, and perhaps even continents. The midnight strike had neutralized one threat, but it had illuminated others. Outside, distant lights flickered in villages. Where locals had witnessed the distant fire, some whispered tales of drones and fireballs. Others feared retribution. Social media buzzed with speculation and awe. The narrative was spreading faster than Traoré could have imagined. Burkina Faso had acted boldly and decisively, defying expectations, asserting a new doctrine of defense. Yet Traoré knew the night's victory was only the beginning. The adversaries were alert now, adapting, calculating. Every move they had planned before had been disrupted, but every resource they controlled was still in play. He turned to Camara. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "Smarter, faster, and this time, they'll know we expect them." Camara nodded, the tension in the room thick but steady. "Then, we'll be ready." From the shadows, unknown eyes tracked the burning convoy, recording, analyzing, and planning. The first strike had been a warning, but the next move could be far deadlier. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had acted, but the real battle was only beginning. The phase. The night sky over southeastern Burkina Faso was punctuated by the faint, mechanical hum of drones poised above. In the command center, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes never wavered from the screens. 12 minutes. That was all it would take. 12 minutes to change the narrative, to defend the refinery, to send a message to the world. Burkina Faso would no longer be passive. Confirm thermal locks on all targets, he commanded. Analysts nodded, their fingers dancing across keyboards, confirming coordinates, calculating trajectories, cross-referencing intelligence from Mali and Niger. Every vehicle, every guard, every suspected threat was accounted for. The NA-7 drones, AI-guided and integrated into AES-net, were silent, invisible, and lethal. Visual confirmation. Targets locked. Lieutenant Camara reported. Traoré's jaw tightened. The convoy carried explosives, encrypted radios, foreign rifles, all evidence that a regional plot had been set into motion. If they reached Kudugu oil refinery, decades of planning and millions in development could go up in flames. The strike commenced. Within seconds, missiles, guided by thermal imaging, streaked through the night, striking each vehicle with precision. Explosions erupted, like controlled storms, fire and smoke billowing into the darkness. In the control room, analysts tracked the results in real time. Every target neutralized. No collateral, no civilians, just decisive action. Across borders, satellite monitoring teams in Mali and Niger observed the operation with awe and apprehension. Messages flew along encrypted channels. The strike had been clean, efficient, and completely within Traoré's control. It was a demonstration of technological prowess and strategic acumen, A small nation had just performed an operation that would have drawn admiration and envy from superpowers alike. Meanwhile, global reaction began to stir. In Washington, analysts debated whether this was a reckless provocation or a strategic masterstroke. Paris issued veiled warnings about destabilization and regional security, while London's intelligence noted the precision and speed of the strike with a mixture of surprise and unease. Stock markets hesitated. Energy investors calculated potential ripple effects across the Sahel. One nation had challenged expectations, and the world was recalibrating. In Ouagadougou, citizens could see the smoke rising in the distance, a tangible reminder that their nation had acted. Social media erupted. Hashtags declaring sovereignty, independence, and self-defense trended across the continent. Murals depicting drones as shields and banners proclaiming "No sovereignty, no future" appeared overnight. Cultural expression became protest. Protest became unity, and unity became an assertion of Africa's rising agency. Yet, inside the command center, Traoré did not celebrate. His focus remained sharp. Intelligence indicated that the network behind the convoy was far from neutralized. Mercenaries, ex-military operatives, and shadowy financiers were now aware of Burkina Faso's capacity. They would adapt, evolve, and strike again. The 12-minute operation had been a warning, but the war for regional stability and sovereignty was only beginning. Traoré turned to Camara. "They will respond," he said, voice low. "Faster, smarter. We've shown them what we can do, but they'll learn from our moves. Every second counts from here on." The room fell silent. Outside, distant lights flickered in villages, and the faint smell of smoke lingered in the air. Analysts continued monitoring, noting patterns and calculating probabilities. The precision of the NA-7 drones and the integration with AES-net had ensured minimal collateral damage, yet the implications were enormous. Burkina Faso had proven that a small nation, guided by resolve and technology, could act decisively, where even global powers hesitated. Even as the strike concluded successfully, question loomed. Who funded the mercenaries? Which actors remained hidden? Plotting retaliation. How far would foreign powers go to reassert control or protect their interests? The operation had demonstrated strength, but it had also revealed vulnerabilities, intelligence gaps, political tensions, and potential flashpoints across the Sahel. Captain Traoré allowed himself a moment to breathe, but only briefly. He knew the balance had shifted, and that the next hours and days would test the resilience of the nation, the alliance, and the doctrine he was shaping. The 12 minutes of fire had been decisive, but the real battle for Africa's sovereignty and strategic independence was still ahead. From the shadows, adversaries regrouped, studying every frame of the strike, analyzing every weakness. Captain Traoré had proven capability, but the next move would be far less predictable, and the Sahel was bracing for the storm that was already gathering on the horizon. Dawn had barely broken when investigators reached the southeastern corridor. The convoy's remnants lay scattered across the desert, a smoldering testament to the midnight strike. Twisted metal glinted in the morning sun, burnt tires, still steaming, and the scent of gunpowder lingered. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this was more than debris. It was confirmation. The threat to Kudugu oil refinery had been real, imminent, and potentially catastrophic. Forensic teams combed through the wreckage. Among the debris were encrypted radios, stamped with French serial codes, rifles manufactured in the United States, and meticulously folded maps, marking resource corridors in English. Each fragment painted a story of international involvement and covert intentions. Even more startling were military ID tags linked to Nigerian operatives. These were not rogue actors. They were trained professionals repurposed for destabilization, moving under the guise of shadow networks. Traoré walked through the imagery reports, his face unreadable, but his mind racing. The convoy had been armed, prepared, and ready to strike Kudugu, the refinery, a $1.3 billion asset. It was more than infrastructure. It was the backbone of Burkina Faso's economic independence. Allowing it to be sabotaged would have sent the message that the nation remained dependent, vulnerable, and easily manipulated. Analysts traced financial trails tied to the convoy. Shell companies registered in London, Paris, and Abu Dhabi had moved millions in recent months, likely funding the operation. Code names like Falcon Hand and DC Handler appeared repeatedly in intercepted communications. Traoré knew these were not idle monikers. They signaled coordination at levels beyond the Sahel. Networks operating across continents, with motives concealed beneath layers of obfuscation. The implications for regional security were staggering. The destroyed convoy was just one piece of a complex puzzle. The sophistication of the operation suggested prior intelligence, funding, and training, all pointing to a network capable of repeated strikes. Burkina Faso's sovereignty had been under direct threat, and the strike had been not just defensive but preemptive. Across Ouagadougou, citizens began piecing together fragments of the story. Social media buzzed with speculation. Some celebrated the strike as proof that their nation would no longer be passive. Others feared that provoking powerful external interests could ignite further instability. Murals depicting the destroyed convoy appeared alongside slogans demanding accountability, sovereignty, and vigilance. Art and protest had merged, capturing the collective awareness of a population now deeply invested in its nation's fate. Meanwhile, international observers scrambled to understand the implications. Analysts in Western capitals acknowledged the precision and decisiveness of the operation. Military commentators described the strike as surgical, noting the integration of AI, drones, and regional coordination. Yet, the underlying question remained: who was orchestrating these shadow networks, and how deep did their reach extend? Inside the presidential complex, Traoré reviewed every report, every photo, every intercepted communication. The strike had been necessary, but it had also exposed the larger threat landscape. Mercenaries trained under foreign programs, financiers operating through opaque channels, and neighboring states whose involvement was ambiguous at best. The complexity of the adversary demanded vigilance, foresight, and unity among the Sahel alliance. He convened a private meeting with senior advisors. The convoy was only the opening move, he said, voice measured but firm. Our vigilance must double. AESnet must track every movement, anticipate every strike, and neutralize threats before they materialize. Maps were spread, plan drawn, contingencies considered. The defense of Kudugu was symbolic and practical. It was a statement that Burkina Faso would not bow to shadow forces, that its resources were for its people, and that its sovereignty was non-negotiable. Even as strategies were set, Traoré allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of the refinery, the nation, and the young soldiers under his command. The midnight strike had saved more than infrastructure. It had preserved the possibility of independence, self-reliance, and dignity. But with victory came the knowledge that adversaries were alert, adapting, and preparing. The analysts' alerts grew urgent. Unusual traffic along secondary routes suggested that remnants of the mercenary network were regrouping. Communications hinted at coordination with unknown partners beyond the Sahel. Traoré's eyes narrowed. The convoy's destruction had revealed hidden hands, but it had also provoked their response. Captain Ibrahim Traoré knew the strike had won a battle, but exposed a larger war. Somewhere, unseen forces were mobilizing, planning, and watching. The question was no longer if they would strike again, but how devastating their next move would be, and whether the Sahel alliance could withstand it. The wreckage of the convoy had barely cooled when unsettling reports began to surface. Among the debris, forensic teams found traces of former Nigerian Special Forces operatives, soldiers once loyal to their country, now repurposed as mercenaries. Operating in shadows and guided by distant patrons, Captain Ibrahim Traoré studied the intelligence with a mixture of resolve and concern. The enemy was no longer faceless. It had a history, a strategy, and a familiarity with the terrain. Inside the presidential complex, Traoré convened a secure meeting with senior military advisors. These men know our tactics. They trained under programs funded by foreign powers. They understand the rules of engagement we follow, he said, his voice steady but edged with tension. We cannot underestimate them. They are ghosts. And ghosts are dangerous, precisely because they can strike where we least expect. Analysts confirmed that encrypted communications from the mercenary network had been traced to servers in multiple countries, including locations in Europe, and the United States. While official governments denied involvement, the fingerprints were undeniable. It was a web of influence, stretching across borders, manipulating personnel, once considered allies. The very forces trained to maintain regional security were now instruments of destabilization. Traoré's mind shifted to the political landscape within Burkina Faso. Fear of internal dissent, possible sympathizers to foreign interests, and corrupt elements within the military added layers of complexity. The midnight strike had sent a powerful message externally, but internally, trust had to be measured and recalibrated. Every decision carried the weight of potential betrayal. In the field, AESnet operatives monitored secondary corridors and smaller convoys. Patterns suggested that mercenary units were regrouping, testing vulnerabilities, and probing the Sahel Alliance's coordination. Even the best intelligence could not reveal intentions in full. Anticipation became both a science and an art. For citizens in Ouagadougou and beyond, the narrative was electrifying. News of internal mercenary involvement spread quickly, inciting a mixture of pride and fear. Social media buzzed with speculation. Some praised the government for decisive action, while others whispered anxiously about infiltration and the proximity of danger. The psychological tension was palpable. The nation had tasted both power and vulnerability. Traoré convened a tactical review, emphasizing that defensive strategies could no longer be reactive. If we wait for them to strike, it will be too late, he asserted. We must anticipate, neutralise, and preempt. AESnet, or drones, our operatives, they are our eyes and hands. But intelligence without action is useless. He paused, scanning the faces of his closest advisors. We are playing a game where every move matters, and mistakes are measured in lives. Even as plans solidified, shadows moved elsewhere. Reports indicated that other regional players, countries long considered allies, were quietly recalibrating, weighing risk versus benefit. Watching the Sahel Alliance with wary eyes, could Burkina Faso's decisive strike inspire cooperation, or would it provoke envy, suspicion, and subtle sabotage? Every ally carried a potential threat. Every border could conceal operatives poised to destabilize the fragile equilibrium. Traoré's thoughts briefly drifted to the Kudugu oil refinery. Its protection had been symbolic and strategic, but the network behind the convoy hinted at a much broader objective, a coordinated effort to undermine the region's emerging autonomy. He understood the stakes in ways the public could not yet fathom. Every action had ripple effects. Every strike would provoke analysis, and every demonstration of strength would be countered by unseen forces. By midnight, the city was quiet again, but inside AESnet operations, tension hummed like a live wire. Field reports indicated new mercenary movements along less traveled routes, testing security protocols, and attempting to probe weaknesses. The enemy was learning, adapting, evolving. The first strike had been a warning, but now, shadows within the region were preparing their response. Captain Ibrahim Traoré knew that neutralizing one convoy had only revealed the depth of the threat. The mercenaries, the infiltrators, and the shadow networks were already plotting, and the next strike could be smarter, deadlier, and closer than anyone expected. The true test of the Sahel Alliance was about to begin. The city of Ouagadougou lay under a veil of calm, but inside the operations center, tension crackled like electricity. Captain Ibrahim Traoré hovered over a series of monitors displaying real-time data from AESnet. The NA-7 drones, a product of quiet collaboration between Burkina Faso, North Korea, and Russia, were more than machines. They were the embodiment of precision, autonomy, and deterrence. Each unit was capable of reaching deep into hostile territory, guided by AI and integrated with encrypted communication networks. This is not just a weapon, Traoré told his analysts. It is a statement, a demonstration that Africa can protect itself with the tools it chooses, on its own terms. His eyes scanned the thermal and optical feeds of recent operations. Every strike executed by the NA-7 had been surgical, leaving minimal collateral damage while neutralizing strategic threats. 12 minutes from command to impact, and no civilian casualties, a feat that rivaled the capabilities of the world's most advanced militaries. Analysts nodded in quiet awe. Reports highlighted the drone's performance metrics: AI-guided targeting, adaptive navigation, and thermal tracking that ensured precision under adverse conditions. In military circles across Europe and the United States, experts were forced to acknowledge a new reality. A small African nation had achieved battlefield efficiency. The West had long monopolized. Traore leaned back, considering the broader implications. The convoy strike had been decisive, but the NA7's presence meant more than immediate tactical victories. It was deterrence, signaling to shadow networks, mercenaries, and foreign powers that Burkina Faso was no longer an easy target. Yet, with this capability came responsibility. Any miscalculation could escalate conflict, provoke retaliation, or draw unwanted attention from global actors accustomed to dominance. Overseas, analysts debated the strike with fascination and unease. Washington analysts admitted the precision and speed of the operation challenged conventional expectations. Paris issued cautious statements about regional stability, acknowledging the potential for escalation. London quietly assessed the impact on existing military contracts and the shifting balance of influence in the Sahel. Investors trembled, calculating the risk to resource extraction, energy supply chains, and infrastructure contracts. Inside the operations center, Traore's focus was unwavering. Intelligence suggested that remnants of the mercenary network were regrouping, testing vulnerabilities, and analyzing previous drone movements. The next confrontation would require anticipating adaptations, outmaneuvering strategic planners, and projecting strength without overextending the nation's capacity. Sir, Lieutenant Camara said, AESnet is detecting unusual activity along secondary routes. It appears they are probing, likely trying to identify weaknesses in our perimeter. Traore's expression hardened. They've learned fast, but so have we. The NA7 drones are ready, and the network is watching every corridor. They think they can exploit gaps. They will find none. The operation had achieved more than tactical success. It had transformed perceptions. In cities across the Sahel, citizens discussed the implications of a nation defending itself with intelligence, technology, and decisive leadership. Murals appeared depicting drones as shields. Banners proclaimed sovereignty, and social media exploded with hashtags celebrating African initiative and strength. Culture became a tool for solidarity, a psychological reinforcement of national and regional resilience. Yet Traore knew the power of perception was double-edged. Every act of strength was observed, analyzed, and countered by adversaries beyond the region. Every victory could provoke a response calculated to exploit any misstep. He turned to Camara, voice low but firm. They've seen the NA7. They know what we are capable of. The question now is, will they adapt faster than we anticipate? Camara nodded, eyes fixed on the screens. They will try, sire, but we will be ready. The NA7 drones hummed quietly, invisible guardians in the night, watching, tracking, ready to strike at the first sign of aggression. Outside, the city slept under an uneasy peace, but within the operations center, every alert, every blip, every anomaly was a reminder. The world had changed. Burkina Faso had proven capability, and with it, a new doctrine of defense was emerging. As the NA7 drones maintained their silent vigil, intelligence analysts detected coordinated movements across multiple borders. Captain Ibrahim Traore realized that while the clean blade of Ouagadougou had struck true, the shadow networks were already evolving, and the next encounter could test the limits of the Sahel alliance like never before. By dawn, the effects of the midnight strike had rippled far beyond Ouagadougou. Across the Sahel, cities buzzed with news, speculation, and awe. In Bamako, young students gathered in courtyards, replaying fragments of Captain Ibrahim Traore's declaration. In Niamey, street vendors discussed the precision of the strike while painting murals depicting drones as protectors, not instruments of foreign dominance. Across the region, ordinary citizens were no longer passive observers. They were participants in a movement shaped by courage, technology, and the assertion of sovereignty. Social media amplified every message. Hashtags such as Sahel Rising, Sovereignty Defended, and Don't Mess with Africa trended within hours. Viral videos recreated the drone strike in vivid detail, blending imagery with Afrobeat rhythms. A short clip of university students reenacting Traoré's words reached over 5 million views in a single day. Spoke of Wortboot. Musicians and visual artists turned the event into a cultural phenomenon, transforming fear into pride and action into narrative. But the shockwaves were not only cultural. Political analysts noted the shift in perception. African nations could now act decisively, projecting strength previously attributed only to global superpowers. The strike had been surgical, decisive, and symbolic. It was a message. Africa would no longer allow covert operations, foreign influence, or mercenary networks to dictate its destiny. Governments took notice. AES-net partners in Mali and Niger convened emergency councils, reviewing intelligence, reinforcing coordination, and preparing for possible retaliation. Leaders understood that the strike had not only neutralized a convoy, it had established a precedent. Any threat against one member of the alliance would now be treated as a threat to all. For the first time, collective defense was not theoretical. It was operational, enforceable, and symbolically powerful. Western capitals responded cautiously. Analysts debated whether Burkina Faso's boldness was reckless or visionary. Financial markets reacted. Energy investors whispered about potential disruptions, and military commentators acknowledged the unprecedented efficiency of the NA-7 drones. For decades, Africa had been a stage for external influence. Now, the script had been rewritten inside the streets. Citizens felt the psychological impact keenly. Pride surged alongside anxiety. The strike had shown capability and resolve, but it had also exposed vulnerabilities. Murals appeared overnight proclaiming, "Sovereignty is defense," while universities organized hackathons to propose innovations for AES-net. Even streetwear reflected the spirit of the moment, with t-shirts and graffiti celebrating the new era of African self-determination. Yet, the thrill of empowerment was tempered by caution. Intelligence reports suggested that shadow networks and foreign interests were actively recalibrating. Mercenary cells were regrouping. Alliances across borders were shifting, and financiers of destabilization were already seeking new vectors of influence. The Sahel Alliance had won the first round, but the broader contest was just beginning. Captain Traoré observed these developments with measured eyes. The cultural and political surge was encouraging, yet he knew that symbolic victories required operational follow-through. Drones, analysts, and field operatives had proven their worth, but networks that spanned continents, trained under foreign programs, and funded through opaque channels were learning fast. Anticipation and adaptability would define the next phase. Even within the alliance, tension simmered. Officials debated priorities, allocation of resources, and contingency plans. Each decision carried weight, for missteps could unravel the fragile cohesion established in the wake of the strike. Traoré understood that leadership now required foresight beyond borders, patience beyond politics, and resolve beyond fear. The people, however, were unrelenting. Demonstrations in cities across the Sahel expressed solidarity, pride, and a shared narrative of self-determination. They saw the strike as more than military action. It was a declaration that Africa could define its own future, resist manipulation, and assert autonomy. The psychological shift was profound. Citizens recognized their power not just as spectators but as participants in a collective vision. As the continent absorbed the shockwaves, Traoré's analysts detected patterns suggesting that adversaries were preparing to adapt. The initial strike had ignited pride, unity, and attention, but somewhere beyond sight, a more coordinated, more dangerous response was forming. The Sahel Alliance had made a statement, but the real test of its resilience was only beginning. The smoke of the midnight strike had barely cleared when leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger convened in Niamey for an emergency summit that would redefine regional security. The room was charged with a rare combination of urgency and purpose. For decades, African nations had operated independently, fragmented, and often subject to foreign influence. Tonight, those patterns were to be rewritten. Operation Iron Shield was being born. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood at the center of the command room, flanked by his counterparts. Large digital maps displayed satellite feeds, drone patrols, and encrypted communications linking all three nations. AESnet, the joint security network that had already proven its lethal precision, would now form the backbone of a coordinated regional defense. Every node, sensor, and patrol was integrated under a unified command. An attack on one member would trigger an immediate collective response. The threat is real and persistent, Traoré said, voice steady but charged. We will integrate surveillance, intelligence, and rapid response assets. Any shadow network moving within our borders will be detected and neutralized before it can act. Coordination, precision, and preemption are our principles. Analysts mapped potential infiltration routes, monitored secondary corridors, and identified high-value targets. Drone patrols rotated along the Sahel, while ground teams coordinated silently through encrypted AESnet channels. Satellite imagery was cross-referenced with local informants, and contingency plans accounted for mercenary maneuvers, environmental variables, and potential interference. The operation was both defensive and anticipatory. Africa, defending itself on its own terms. Outside the summit, citizens watched with growing pride and anticipation. In Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, murals depicted leaders standing beneath a metallic shield. While students debated the strategy in classrooms and university halls, hackathons were organized to propose AESnet improvements, and social media exploded with hashtags like Iron Shield, Sovereignty Defended, and African Unity. The cultural response was as much a statement as the military planning itself. African security was no longer a gift from abroad. It was a right claimed and executed by the continent. Yet Operation Iron Shield faced immediate challenges. Shadow networks and mercenary contingents were already adapting, probing for weaknesses, and observing the alliance's coordination. Foreign powers long accustomed to influencing regional security watched silently, recalculating their strategies. Within the summit room, political sensitivity was a constant undercurrent. Every decision, every command had to maintain cohesion, demonstrate strength, and avoid unnecessary provocation. Inside the operations center, AESnet nodes blinked with activity. Drones monitored hundreds of kilometers. Field operatives reported movement, and intelligence analysts coordinated financial and communication intercepts. Every detail was logged, cross-referenced, and prepared for action. Traoré's eyes scanned the map, noting patterns, assessing risk, and predicting the adversary's adaptations. It was a delicate choreography of technology, strategy, and human judgment. Even with meticulous planning, tension remained palpable. Analysts reported unusual traffic along secondary routes, suggesting shadow networks were reorganizing and testing vulnerabilities. The alliance had proven its strength, but its true test would come when adversaries reacted with intelligence, stealth, and speed. Traoré's mind raced through potential scenarios, balancing risk with opportunity, and calculating moves several steps ahead. For the people, Operation Iron Shield was transformative. Citizens rallied in cities, sharing stories, organizing community meetings, and spreading news online. Artists celebrated the initiative through murals, music, and performances depicting drones as guardians, not weapons of foreign control. The alliance had become a symbol of hope, unity, and autonomy. Night fell over Nema. AESnet monitored coordinated patrols across borders, drones hovering silently while satellites scanned for anomalies. Field reports confirmed that secondary routes were under surveillance, and all nodes were operational. Traoré allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, tempered by vigilance. The alliance had drawn a line in the sand, but he knew adversaries were observing, analyzing, and adapting. Operation Iron Shield was fully operational, projecting African power and unity. Yet, somewhere beyond the borders, mercenary networks and foreign actors were already planning their response. Captain Ibrahim Traoré understood that while the shield was strong, the Sahel Alliance's resilience would soon be tested in ways no map or satellite could predict. The real battle for sovereignty was only beginning. The streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey pulsed with life, tension, and a sense of shared destiny. Citizens poured into public squares, waving flags emblazoned with the colors of their nations and chanting slogans that had never felt so urgent. Sovereignty is defense, and we decide our future. Murals depicting drones as protective sentinels appeared overnight on walls, alleys, and school gates. Every stroke of paint told a story of vigilance, pride, and collective determination. University campuses became hubs of strategic discussion. Students organized forums, workshops, and hackathons, suggesting enhancements for AESnet surveillance systems. They debated drone patrol schedules, proposed AI refinements, and explored encryption protocols. Even teenagers participated, creating digital campaigns and viral videos that spread across social media. Hashtags like Iron Shield, Unity Under Fire, and Sovereignty Defended dominated timelines, turning civic pride into a continent-wide movement. Music, poetry, and performance art celebrated the Sahel Alliance, transforming military success into cultural expression. Captain Ibrahim Traoré observed the surge of civic engagement with cautious pride. The unity was tangible, inspiring, and essential, but enthusiasm alone could not replace strategic discipline. AESnet nodes were actively monitoring secondary routes along the Sahelian corridor, tracking suspicious convoys, and logging encrypted communications from potential adversaries. Mercenary units, once neutralized in the midnight strike, were regrouping. Shadow networks were probing for weaknesses, analyzing the patterns of drone patrols and ground movements. The alliance's resilience depended on vigilance, foresight, and decisiveness. Inside the operations center, intelligence analysts reported unusual activity along several border routes. Small convoys moved under the cover of darkness, possibly testing the alliance's response protocols. Satellite imagery confirmed irregular patterns, and field operatives relayed updates via secure channels. Traoré convened a council of senior advisors. "Unity is our strength," he said, scanning the room. "But unity must be disciplined. Every action reinforces the alliance, protects our citizens, and demonstrates capability to adversaries who are already watching." The psychological impact on the public was profound. For decades, communities had endured economic exploitation, political manipulation, and foreign influence. Now, the drone strike and Operation Iron Shield had shifted the narrative. Citizens no longer felt like passive observers. They saw themselves as stakeholders in regional security. Parents discussed the implications with their children. Teachers incorporated lessons about sovereignty into classrooms. And local councils organized awareness campaigns. The civic response became a reinforcement mechanism for the military operation itself, creating a feedback loop of vigilance and pride. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Some government officials feared that public displays of unity might provoke foreign powers who had long relied on covert influence. Analysts warned that mercenary networks could adapt, exploiting even minor lapses in coordination. Each decision carried weight, and Traoré understood that overconfidence could lead to strategic miscalculations. He balanced the public celebration with internal caution, ensuring that the alliance maintained operational discipline. Even as celebrations spread, AESnet maintained constant surveillance. Drones hovered silently above remote corridors, satellites scanned hundreds of kilometers, and operatives in the field tracked every movement with precision. Patrols were coordinated across borders, integrating rapid response teams, ensuring that any attempt at infiltration could be detected and neutralized. The alliance was alive, dynamic, and ready to act, yet fully aware that adversaries were studying .god, adapting, and preparing. Across the Sahel, citizens mirrored these developments. Markets buzzed with conversations about sovereignty and collective defense. Murals and street art symbolized unity. TikTok videos recreated the midnight strike, blending Afrobeat rhythms with real-time footage of drone surveillance. Hashtags and online campaigns became tools of psychological empowerment, spreading hope and vigilance while reinforcing the Sahel Alliance's presence in the public consciousness. Inside the operations center, Traoré considered the next steps. Mercenaries were regrouping, shadow networks were adapting, and neighboring states were quietly observing. testing the alliance's cohesion. Every alert, every movement, every intercepted communication mattered. The real challenge was sustaining unity, not just among the governments, but across the population, intelligence apparatus, and military coordination. Cliffhanger. As cities celebrated and citizens rallied under banners of unity, Captain Ibrahim Traore watched incoming reports with a keen eye. Shadow networks were evolving, analyzing each patrol, each public reaction, each strategic maneuver. Operation Iron Shield had survived its first test, but the real trial of African unity, resilience, and strategy was only beginning. The next move, by unseen adversaries, could strike closer, harder, and with consequences that would ripple across the Sahel and beyond. The echoes of the midnight strike and Operation Iron Shield had barely faded across the Sahel when diplomatic cables began flooding the capitals of Washington, Paris, and London. Analysts in Western governments scrambled to interpret the signals. A small African nation, once considered a peripheral player, had just demonstrated precision drone warfare, integrated intelligence, and regional cooperation that rivaled capabilities long monopolized by superpowers. The implications were seismic. In Washington, senior officials debated the nature of the threat. Some described Captain Ibrahim Traore's actions as audacious, but potentially destabilizing. Others saw a model of preemptive sovereignty that could inspire other nations. Military analysts examined satellite images of the NA-7 drones in action, comparing efficiency, speed, and accuracy to U.S. and European capabilities. One observer muttered, "They executed in 12 minutes what we would have calculated for days, and with zero collateral." Paris, more vocal, issued a statement warning that unilateral strikes could endanger regional stability. French military advisors recalculated the risk to their bases and contracts across the Sahel. London quietly reassessed energy and mineral investments, projecting potential losses if African nations independently defended key infrastructure. Multinational corporations began sending internal memos, reviewing contracts worth billions, while hedge funds quietly adjusted portfolios in anticipation of market volatility. Yet even as these capitals fretted, Traoré maintained focus. Diplomacy and military action were inseparable. Operation Iron Shield was not intended to provoke, but to protect. Every strike, every patrol, every AES-net node had been deployed with precision to neutralize immediate threats while signaling capability and intent. But the world was watching, and adversaries were already plotting responses that might combine economic pressure, covert operations, and public diplomacy to undermine the alliance. Within the presidential complex, Traoré convened a series of emergency briefings. Ambassadors from regional and continental organizations were summoned. "We must communicate our doctrine clearly," Traoré said, voice firm. "We act to protect sovereignty, not to destabilize, but we will respond decisively if threatened. Every foreign actor must understand the rules of engagement. Africa decides its own fate." His advisors reviewed a range of diplomatic responses. Letters to the African Union emphasized collective security, while outreach to neighboring nations sought reassurance and partnership. Contingency plans were drafted for economic sanctions, cyber attacks, and potential covert interference. Traoré understood that the alliance's credibility depended not just on military capability, but on carefully calibrated messaging, trust building, and transparency within the region. Even with meticulous planning, uncertainty loomed. Intelligence analysts noted unusual financial flows through shell companies in Europe and the Middle East, possibly linked to mercenary networks adapting to Operation Iron Shield. Diplomatic channels hinted at backdoor conversations between foreign actors, probing the limits of the alliance's cohesion. Every diplomatic move by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger was being scrutinized, interpreted, and countered by those who had long exploited divisions within Africa. For the people, the political maneuvers remained abstract, but their effects were tangible. Markets held steady amid speculation, public morale remained high, and social media reflected optimism, tempered by caution. Citizens began to understand that sovereignty required more than street demonstrations and cultural campaigns. It required careful navigation of global power structures. Schools incorporated discussions of diplomacy, defense, and economic strategy, framing the strike and alliance as lessons in agency, foresight, and resilience. Traoré's internal calculus was relentless. Military, civic, and diplomatic fronts had to operate in harmony. A misstep on one front could ripple across the others. Foreign actors would test patience, probe defenses, and challenge credibility. Every intercepted communication, financial anomaly, or unusual convoy was evaluated not just for immediate tactical significance, but for potential diplomatic ramifications. Untitled AES-net reported coordinated movements along secondary corridors, suggesting the shadow networks were testing boundaries. Satellite feeds showed unusual gatherings in neighboring regions, potentially linked to foreign-backed actors seeking to undermine the alliance. Traoré reviewed the intelligence, considering both the military and diplomatic implications. Every drone deployed, every convoy monitored, every alert logged contributed to a broader understanding of the evolving threat landscape. The international community was watching, analyzing, and recalculating. Captain Ibrahim Traoré knew that while Operation Iron Shield had demonstrated strength, diplomacy and strategy would now determine whether Africa's sovereignty could withstand the combined pressure of covert networks, foreign interests, and regional instability. The real test, military, political, and psychological, was only beginning, and the next move by adversaries could redefine the balance of power in the Sahel forever. The Sahel hung in suspense. Weeks of drone patrols, AES-net coordination, and diplomatic maneuvering had kept the region on edge. But the moment of transformation had arrived. Captain Ibrahim Traoré studied the digital map, the blinking nodes of AES-net satellites, reflecting potential threats across the border. Reports indicated increased mercenary activity, shadow network mobilization, and subtle diplomatic pressures from foreign powers. It was time for decisive action, a turning point that would determine whether the Sahel alliance could truly stand on its own. Traoré convened his closest advisors in the command center. "We are at the crossroads," he began, voice steady but commanding. "Every move we make now will define the balance of power for years to come. We cannot simply react. We must anticipate, adapt, and assert our authority. The time for incremental steps has passed." The room was tense. Analysts and military advisors outlined options: reinforce border patrols, expand AES-net coverage, conduct targeted strikes against emerging threats, or launch a coordinated show of force to assert dominance and deter future incursions. Each option carried risks. A miscalculation could provoke retaliation, destabilize regional economies, or fracture political alliances within the Sahel. Traoré's eyes lingered on the satellite imagery of the Kudugu oil refinery, the symbol of Burkina Faso's sovereignty and economic independence. Protecting it had been the catalyst for the initial strike, and now, the refinery represented more than infrastructure. It was the pivot around which regional stability turned. If adversaries succeeded in sabotaging it, the ripple effects could devastate confidence, morale, and the hard-won credibility of the alliance. After hours of deliberation, Traoré made his decision. "We strike first," he declared, with precision, intelligence, and coordination. The convoy we neutralized before was only a warning. Shadow networks, mercenary forces, and foreign interests are testing us. If we hesitate, they will act. We will act preemptively, protect our assets, and assert the doctrine of African sovereignty. Every threat must understand. Attacks against one of us will not go unanswered. Preparations were meticulous. AES-net. Satellites monitored secondary and tertiary routes. Drones patrolled border corridors, with real-time feedback to command centers, and ground operatives coordinated with local authorities to secure key infrastructure. Every detail was cross-checked, every scenario simulated, ensuring that the operation could adapt to unexpected contingencies. Across the Sahel, citizens felt the tension. Markets were quieter than usual. Schools held workshops, discussing vigilance and community defense, and media outlets emphasized the importance of unity and awareness. Murals and street art depicted the alliance as a metallic shield spanning the three nations. Social media campaigns amplified the narrative of preemptive protection, reinforcing public confidence and civic engagement. International observers reacted cautiously. Washington, Paris, and London monitored satellite feeds, military movements, and communications with unease. Analysts acknowledged the precision and coordination of the Sahel alliance, noting that a small coalition had effectively established capabilities comparable to long-dominant global powers. Financial markets reacted cautiously, recalculating risks for energy contracts, investments, and regional stability. Multinational corporations reviewed contingency plans, wary that assertive African nations could reshape contractual norms. Inside the operations center, Traoré oversaw every facet of the operation. Drones were deployed along anticipated routes. Communication nodes were synchronized, and emergency contingencies prepared. He allowed himself a brief reflection on the journey that had brought them here. From a single convoy strike, to the formation of Operation Iron Shield, to the rallying of public support, to navigating international pressures, each step had been calculated, each risk measured, but the outcome still depended on precise execution. As night fell, the drones moved with silent precision. AES-net monitored every corridor, and field teams reported anomalies. Every element of the operation was aligned, ready to respond instantaneously. For the first time, the Sahel Alliance was acting not just defensively, but proactively, shaping the strategic landscape rather than reacting to it. As the operation reached its critical phase, intelligence analysts detected a new pattern. Shadow networks had adapted, coordinating across borders with unprecedented speed. Captain Ibrahim Traoré realized that the turning point had been reached. One misstep could unravel the alliance, or trigger a confrontation the Sahel had never faced. The future of African sovereignty now hung in the balance. Night had descended over the Sahel, but the tension was far from darkness. It pulsed like electricity through every city, town, and village. Reports came from Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey simultaneously. Demonstrations, spontaneous gatherings, and unexpected protests had erupted. Citizens waved flags, chanted slogans, and blocked major arteries. Some celebrated the alliance's newfound strength, while others voiced anxiety about escalating threats, foreign retaliation, and internal dissent. The streets became a theater of both pride and fear, reflecting the delicate balance Traoré's leadership had created. Inside the operations center, Captain Ibrahim Traoré watched multiple live feeds, coordinating responses with precision. Maintain perimeter security, but do not escalate unnecessarily, he ordered. Analysts and field officers moved in tandem, monitoring the demonstrations, securing critical infrastructure, and tracking suspicious activities along key routes. The alliance had to act decisively to prevent chaos, yet carefully enough to avoid alienating the very citizens whose support was essential. Meanwhile, intelligence reports indicated more sinister movements. Shadow networks, previously weakened by Operation Iron Shield, were regrouping. Mercenary units crossed borders with increased coordination, and chatter suggested possible sabotage or targeted attacks against strategic assets like Kudugu oil refinery. Satellites and AES-net drones scanned the Sahelian corridors, capturing unusual convoys and encrypted transmissions. Every signal was logged, every anomaly investigated, but the sheer scale and unpredictability amplified the pressure on leadership. Traoré convened an urgent council with military and political advisors. The public is vigilant. Our people are aware, and our assets are protected, he said. But shadow networks are adapting. They are testing our cohesion, our readiness, and our will. We must anticipate their moves before they strike. Our strategy must be proactive and decisive. He emphasized coordination across borders, urging the Sahel Alliance to maintain unity and communication, ensuring that a single breach would not spiral into widespread destabilization. In Ouagadougou, the crowds were vocal, but mostly disciplined. Street artists and musicians used murals and performances to communicate solidarity, depicting drones as protective wings over the Sahel. Citizens debated strategy and sovereignty in markets and schools, demonstrating a deepening civic consciousness. Yet, beneath the surface, tension was rising. Some factions sought to exploit the unrest to further political ambitions. While others plotted subtle sabotage to undermine confidence in the alliance, international observers watched closely. In Washington, Paris, and London, analysts recalculated risk and impact. Military advisors noted that the Sahel alliance had achieved an unprecedented level of integration, capable of monitoring multiple borders simultaneously. Diplomats expressed concern that escalating unrest could provoke intervention, while financial markets reacted to the possibility of regional instability. Multinational corporations, whose operations depended on resource stability, assessed exposure to political and security risks across the Sahel. Traoré's internal calculus was relentless. He knew that the demonstrations were both a reflection of empowerment and a stress test of governance. Every drone sortie, patrol, and intelligence report had to be integrated with political oversight. A misstep could escalate unrest, undermine public trust, or give adversaries an opportunity. He paced the command room, eyes scanning multiple feeds, weighing every signal, every anomaly, every decision. As night deepened, reports confirmed that some shadow networks had attempted to infiltrate secondary corridors, likely aiming to sabotage infrastructure or provoke localized chaos. AESnet tracked their movements. Deploying drones and rapid response teams in real time, the operation demonstrated that the alliance could respond to threats instantaneously. Yet the complexity and coordination required stretched resources to their limits. The psychological impact was profound. Citizens were simultaneously inspired and anxious. The alliance had demonstrated capability and determination. Yet the presence of active threats reminded them that sovereignty required constant vigilance. Community leaders, educators, and civic organizations emphasized preparedness, awareness, and collaboration, creating a culture that mirrored the operational doctrine of the alliance. As the night's events unfolded, intelligence analysts detected an unusual, coordinated signal, originating from across multiple borders, indicating that a larger, more coordinated operation was imminent. Captain Ibrahim Traoré realized that the echoes of fire from the initial strikes were only the beginning. The Sahel Alliance had survived its first crisis, but the true test, a confrontation that could determine the region's stability for years, was about to arrive. The early hours in Ouagadougou were tense but decisive. Captain Ibrahim Traoré surveyed the operational feeds, AESnet nodes blinking in synchronized precision. The shadow networks that had stirred unrest, provoked protests, and tested the Sahel Alliance's coordination were now being met with a calculated counter-response. Every drone, satellite, and rapid response team moved in, orchestrated harmony. A choreography honed through weeks of anticipation and strategy. Focus on containment first, Traoré instructed. Voice steady, but sharp. Neutralize threats without escalation. Protect the civilians, secure infrastructure, and maintain the narrative of control. Analysts at his side monitored convoys, intercepted communications, and tracked anomalies across borders. Each signal represented a potential strike point, each movement a test of the alliance's adaptability. Across the Sahel, reports indicated that pockets of unrest were being isolated, protest movements remaining mostly peaceful, and mercenary units encountering decisive resistance from integrated forces. AESnet drones, guided by AI and live intelligence feeds, executed precision strikes on equipment and supply lines without causing collateral damage. Satellites relayed data in real time, ensuring that each intervention was informed by the latest intelligence. Traoré allowed himself a brief nod. The tide was turning. The alliance had shifted from reactive defense to proactive control. For the first time, African nations were not merely surviving threats, they were dictating the terms of engagement. Strategic corridors were secured. The Kudugu oil refinery remained fully operational, and the shadow networks were being systematically disrupted. In the streets, citizens felt the psychological impact. Murals and banners celebrated the resilience of the alliance. In schools, students analyzed the operations as lessons in strategy, leadership, and civic responsibility. Social media amplified both the success and the narrative of sovereignty, while musicians, poets, and street performers framed the events as a cultural victory, a demonstration that African unity, combined with technological capability, could shape reality rather than simply respond to it. Yet triumph carried vigilance. Intelligence analysts noted that while immediate threats had been contained, the underlying networks remained active. Mercenaries regrouped in hidden corridors. Shadow financiers adjusted their strategies, and neighboring nations observed closely, weighing both risk and opportunity. Traore understood that operational victory was only one element of lasting sovereignty. Political, social, and economic stability had to be maintained simultaneously. Inside the command center, advisors debated next steps. We've secured immediate threats, but we must maintain surveillance and readiness. One analyst urged. Another added, public confidence is high, but complacency is our enemy. Shadow networks will adapt, and we must anticipate their next moves. Traore absorbed every argument, weighing strategy against optics, military necessity against political messaging. Every decision carried the weight of multiple future scenarios. In response, Traore initiated a coordinated series of maneuvers. Drones patrolled secondary and tertiary corridors. Rapid response teams conducted strategic sweeps, and AES-net nodes were recalibrated to detect even subtle anomalies. Communications were encrypted and monitored, ensuring that the shadow networks could not exploit delays or gaps. The alliance operated with the precision of a well-oiled mechanism, demonstrating capability, discipline, and resolve. Across the Sahel, the citizens' perspective reinforced the operational shift. Demonstrations of unity continued, but with greater organization and purpose. Civic leaders worked with local authorities to disseminate accurate information, reducing confusion and preventing panic. Artists and musicians celebrated victories with street performances, while social media campaigns highlighted the alliance's successes. The narrative of sovereignty and self-determination was reinforced not only through action but through culture, education, and communication. As dawn approached, AES-net reports indicated that the majority of active threats had been neutralized or contained. Mercenary supply lines were disrupted, communications jammed, and coordinated attacks prevented. The alliance had achieved operational success without resorting to excessive force, demonstrating both capability and restraint. For the first time, citizens and leaders alike could sense a turning point, a shift from vulnerability to controlled autonomy. Captain Ibrahim Traoré knew that while the immediate tide had turned, the battle for long-term stability was far from over. Shadow networks were still present. Foreign interests remained attentive, and the Sahel alliance would soon face challenges even more complex than the crisis it had just weathered. The true test of African sovereignty and the durability of Operation Iron Shield was still ahead. The dawn after the decisive operations was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Captain Ibrahim Traoré reviewed intelligence reports, satellite imagery, and drone data. The Sahel alliance had achieved a significant victory. Mercenary networks were disrupted, key corridors secured, and the Kudugu oil refinery remained intact. Yet for all the celebrations, the cost was already becoming clear. Every operation left ripples political, economic, and social that demanded attention and reflection. Inside the command center, advisors briefed Traoré on the fallout. Some local officials reported strained resources in districts heavily patrolled during the operations. Small communities had experienced disruptions in transportation and supply chains, and there were reports of minor property damage near engagement zones. The victory is strategic, one analyst said, but the social and economic disruptions are real. We must address these before they erode public confidence. Traoré's gaze shifted to the broader region. The alliance had demonstrated that African nations could defend sovereignty, but the move had also attracted attention from foreign powers. Diplomatic cables suggested quiet warnings, economic recalculations, and subtle pressure campaigns. Investors reconsidered contracts across the Sahel. Energy companies evaluated alternative supply lines, and regional governments were discreetly reminded of their dependence on multilateral stability. For Burkina Faso, the price of victory included heightened scrutiny and geopolitical tension. Across the cities, citizens reacted in complex ways. Many celebrated the operational success, attending rallies and school events, or posting online in support of the alliance. Yet, undercurrents of anxiety persisted. Rumors of counterstrikes, potential economic sanctions, and the presence of shadow networks created uncertainty. Civic leaders and educators emphasized the importance of vigilance, fostering awareness while celebrating resilience. Murals and social media campaigns reinforced the message. Sovereignty came with responsibility and constant vigilance. Traoré convened a regional council to assess both victories and vulnerabilities. "We have achieved tactical success," he began, "but victory is never free. Every action we take sends signals, some unintended. We must manage perception, maintain morale, and ensure that our operations reinforce unity rather than sow doubt." Advisors discussed contingency measures, economic stabilization efforts, and communication campaigns designed to reassure citizens while deterring adversaries. The economic impact was immediately apparent. Disrupted supply chains and heightened security measures had caused temporary delays in markets and transport. Energy distribution from Kudugu remained uninterrupted, but insurance costs, shipping adjustments, and heightened risk calculations had ripple effects. International firms quietly recalculated exposure, and financial analysts projected billions in potential short-term losses. The alliance's success on the battlefield had shifted the cost onto multiple fronts: political credibility, public trust, and economic stability. Despite these pressures, there were victories that transcended strategy and infrastructure. The unity forged among Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had strengthened regional cooperation. AES-net had proven operational efficiency, demonstrating that integrated surveillance, drones, and rapid response teams could operate in concert across national borders. Citizens' awareness and participation had increased, creating a culture of vigilance and civic engagement that bolstered the alliance's legitimacy. Yet Traoré remained focused on threats still present. Shadow networks had not been entirely neutralized. Mercenary elements continued to regroup along hidden corridors. Foreign financiers sought ways to undermine the alliance, and regional powers watched closely. The victory had been decisive, but the war for sustained sovereignty, credibility, and operational dominance was ongoing. Every policy decision, opérationnel manœuvre, and diplomatic engagement now carried the weight of potential escalation. In Ouagadougou, the streets reflected both pride and concern. Célébration persisted, but so did dialogues on responsibility. Citizens debated the cost of vigilance, the role of technology, and the nature of autonomy. Public forums, workshops, and media discussions emphasized the duality of strength and consequence. Cultural expressions, murals, performances, online campaigns celebrated unity, while acknowledging the ongoing risks. As the Sahel Alliance consolidated its gains, intelligence analysts reported unusual cross-border activity, suggesting new coordination among mercenary networks and foreign actors. Captain Ibrahim Traoré knew that every victory carried consequences, and that sustaining sovereignty required foresight, vigilance, and the willingness to confront emerging threats. The next chapter in Africa's assertion of power was approaching, and the cost of complacency had never been higher. The Sahel was quiet in the early morning, but the quiet was heavy with reflection. Captain Ibrahim Traoré surveyed the operational feeds one last time, aware that the battles, both visible and invisible, had left marks that would endure. The midnight strike, Operation Iron Shield, and the decisive maneuvers that followed had altered the landscape of African sovereignty forever. Yet for all the strategic victories, there were lessons etched in fire, blood, and resilience. Inside the command center, advisors compiled reports on casualties, infrastructure, integrity, and political impact. The Kudugu oil refinery remained secure, supply lines were restored, and AES-net operated at full capacity. But the victory had a price: strained resources, heightened tension with foreign powers, and communities temporarily disrupted by defensive operations. Every tactical gain was accompanied by a reminder that sovereignty came at the cost of vigilance, sacrifice, and foresight. Across the Sahel, citizens reflected on the journey. In Ouagadougou, students held workshops analyzing the operations, emphasizing strategic thinking, civic responsibility, and awareness of external pressures. Murals and digital campaigns celebrated triumph, but also reminded people of the fragility of peace. Public forums discussed how vigilance and unity could protect the gains achieved. Blending pride with responsibility, Traoré's gaze fell on the map of the Sahel. Lines representing patrols, drones, and AESnet nodes tracing the borders he had vowed to defend. He thought of the sacrifices made. Soldiers, analysts, operatives, and ordinary citizens who had contributed to the nation's security. He understood that leadership was not measured solely by victories, but by the ability to translate those victories into lasting stability, trust, and vision. International responses were mixed. Western powers acknowledged the precision and discipline of the alliance, but whispers of concern, recalculated investments, and strategic repositioning continued. Foreign mercenary networks were disrupted, yet the intelligence indicated they were adapting. Traoré understood that Africa's assertion of autonomy would not be uncontested. Sovereignty demanded constant vigilance, diplomatic finesse, and readiness for the unforeseen. Within Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the impact was profound. Citizens had witnessed firsthand the ability of a unified alliance to defend its sovereignty. Social media campaigns reinforced pride and vigilance, while educators and community leaders framed the events as lessons in agency, foresight, and resilience. Young people began to see themselves as participants in history, not mere spectators. Civic engagement became a force multiplier for operational security, transforming the abstract concept of sovereignty into tangible action. Yet the story was not without ambiguity. Mercenary remnants remained in the shadows. Networks across borders continued to plot, and foreign actors subtly tested the limits of the alliance. Traoré knew that victories were temporary, if not reinforced by governance, diplomacy, and civic cohesion. The fight for African self-determination was ongoing, a constant balance between power, vigilance, and strategy. As the day progressed, Traoré addressed the nation. His voice was steady, measured, and resolute. We have demonstrated that our sovereignty cannot be undermined by shadows, mercenaries, or foreign influence. We have shown that unity, technology, and vigilance can defend our future. Yet, we must remember, victory carries responsibility. We must safeguard our institutions, our people, and our vision for generations to come. His words resonated not only in the streets, but across social media, where hashtags like African Sovereignty, Iron Shield Legacy, and Future Defended trended continent-wide. In classrooms, children drew pictures of drones not as instruments of war, but as shields of protection. Community groups celebrated unity and civic responsibility. The psychological shift was as important as the military victories. Africans had begun to see themselves as authors of their own destiny. Pride, vigilance, and awareness intertwined to create a culture that could sustain the hard-won sovereignty. Traoré reflected quietly on the broader lesson. African nations could not rely solely on external powers for protection. Autonomy required technology, coordination, strategy, and above all, to collective will. The drone strike, the operations, and the alliance had demonstrated capability, but the most profound victory was the awakening of agency, consciousness, and unity among the people. Cliffhanger turned to hope. Who speaks for Africa when silence reigns? Who will defend sovereignty when threats evolve faster than governments anticipate? The answer, Traoré knew, was in the hands of citizens, leaders, and alliances committed to vigilance, justice, and unity. Africa had drawn its red line not on paper, but in collective will, in action, and in the audacity to say, "We will not be managed. We will not be ignored." I won. The message was clear. Sovereignty was more than rhetoric. It was action, resilience, and preparedness. The Sahel Alliance had survived the first wave of threats, demonstrated capability, and inspired a continent. Yet, the path forward required vigilance, strategy, and unbroken unity. The real power of Africa lay not in technology alone, but in the people's resolve to claim their future. Traoré concluded his reflection with a simple yet powerful declaration. Fear is for those who borrow power. We built ours. The words echoed through the streets, across borders, and into the consciousness of a continent awakened to its potential. The drone strike, the operations, the alliance, all were chapters in a larger story. Africa asserting its agency, defending its sovereignty, and claiming a place in the balance of global power. For educators, policymakers, and citizens alike, the lesson was unmistakable. Vigilance, unity, and courage could define history. For those watching from afar, it was an invitation to acknowledge the power of collective will and the consequences of underestimating a continent that refuses to remain a pawn. Like, share, subscribe, not to follow, but to keep this voice alive. Discuss, debate, and reflect. When dignity is organized, who can silence it? Africa has drawn its red line. Now, it is up to all to defend it. History is unfolding, and you are part of it.